Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LPL playoff primer video. I am very excited to be able to bring you guys this awesome collection of content here for the LPL playoffs. This is my first playoff primer video on the channel, and I'm very excited to bring you guys this format. There are a lot of things going to be going on here today. Not only are we going to be going over my award predictions, or what I would do, the awards that I would hand out: MVP, Rookie of the Year, First Team All-Pro, Second Team All-Pro, Third Team All-Pro. Not only will we be doing all that, we will be going over all 10 teams that made the LPL playoffs in depth, their strengths, their weaknesses, some of their big moments, some of their low moments, where I think that could take them throughout the playoffs. And then we do know our first round matchups here in the LPL, so we will be doing a full first round matchup analysis of both of the series that we will be getting. And then at the end, I'm going to be doing my predictive mock bracket, giving you all of my analysis for how I think the playoffs will be going down here in the LPL. If you guys are excited about that, please go ahead and leave a like. I usually don't ask before the video starts, but this video is going to be a very different kind of video than what you guys are used to on the channel. It's going to be pretty incredible, and I hope you guys are excited. Before we jump in, though, a couple of things I want to talk about. I want to give a big shout out, first of all, to the people helping me make this video. I wouldn't be able to make this without help, so big shout out to them. Leave a like just for them. That really means you gotta leave it now, of course, obviously. Along with that, this is not the only playoff primer video this week that will be going up on the channel. So up on your screen now, you're going to see my schedule for the upcoming week. There's going to be a lot of awesome content. Obviously, the LPL kicks off here today, but tomorrow you guys can expect an LCK version of this video. And then later in the week, we've got LCS and LEC coming down the pipeline as well. So if you guys are excited for that, I don't actually usually ask for this, but go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you want to see more playoff content, this is definitely the place to do it. I don't usually hype myself up this much at the beginning of videos, but we put a lot of time and effort into these playoff primers, and I'm really excited to show you guys what we've got. So, without further ado, without wasting more of your time, we've already spent 2.5 minutes on this intro. Let's go ahead and jump right into my award predictions. Now, this is a what I would do award prediction. So, this might not exactly line up with exactly how people are going to vote come award time for first team, second team, third team, MVP, Rookie of the Year, all that stuff. This is personally how I would vote. However, I do think my awards are going to be the most accurate representation, in my opinion, of what happened in the LPL this split. So, we'll start off with the big one. We will start off with our MVP, and this should come as no surprise to anybody who's not only watched the LPL this split, but has watched my channel and watched my weekly recaps of the LPL. My MVP in summer 2022 is Knight on Top Esports. He is just the best player in the league, and it really isn't that close. He was so much better than almost everybody he played against this year, not only in lane, but his macro sense has really evolved from the time that he was considered kind of a selfish player a couple of years ago. He is definitely not that anymore. He affects the map in many different ways. You can see it with the champions that he picked here in the summer season, the summer split here. Ahri obviously being his most popular, Sylas coming in at number 2, Talia coming in at number 3. Of course, all of these were super meta, and it helps that Knight is very good at all of them, but what it shows is a willingness to not only be able to take over the game on picks like Ahri and Sylas, but the ability to say, I want to take over the map as well. Ahri does a great job of that. Talia obviously is very much known for that. He got 10 LPL MVP awards. They gave out 10 of it to him. I gave him 8 Player of the Series awards. Now, I don't have to be the one to tell you that there were only 16 series the Top Esports played this split. He got them in half, and they were the #1 team in the region. So yes, Knight is my summer 2022 MVP. I don't think that is such an insane, crazy thing to say. He was phenomenal. I do want to give a shout out to my second and third place, which ironically it's spoiling the All-Pros a little bit because it's the top 3 mid laners that I think get first, second, and third. Knight obviously coming in at number 1. I had Xiaohu coming in at number 2 for RNG. And then I had Yagao for JD Gaming coming in at number 3. I think those 3 were the most impactful players in the LPL in summer of 2022. A little bit of spoiler for the All-Pros coming up there, but At the end of the day, those three I think were pretty dominant. People who will feel pretty hard done not to be on that list, I think would probably be like Kanavi, definitely someone who deserved to be there in the conversation, and then someone like Rookie. I think those are your maybe outsiders, your honorable mentions, but at the end of the day, Knight was so good, it really was not a difficult decision for me to choose him as my MVP of the split. Moving on to my Rookie of the Year prediction here, and this one was a little bit easier to do. Obviously, there were a lot of good players that you had to throw into the MVP conversation in terms of the LPL, but really there was one rookie that stood out above the rest as a pretty clear choice for Rookie of the Year, and that is Wayward on top, Esports in the top lane. He was just dominant. He was on the best team in the league, and he looked very good for a majority of the year. Obviously, Week 10, final week of the season, notwithstanding where he got benched, he looked very, very solid. Like, this was a no-brainer pick. He's going to be a feature player for a playoff team, and for a team that is probably a lock for Worlds, as long as they continue to keep up their pace. Wayward looked phenomenal for them throughout the year. His three most played champions, Gwen, Sejuani, Gnar. It kind of shows the versatility that he was able to play with. Not only was he good on the tanks, and yes, the Sejuani pick was a huge dub for top esports all year long, but the Gwen play, I think overall kind of defines how you were good in this meta, or how good you were in this meta, and Wayward was able to play Gwen at a high level, and that definitely helps towards his case of Rookie of the Year, being able to take over team fights in a way that really only Gwen can with over the course of the past few months. So a very, very good summer split here for Wayward. He gets 3 LPL MVP awards. It's not really that much, but I feel like his accolades aren't exactly indicative of how well he actively played throughout a majority of the split. He didn't get a lot of MVP awards because he was stuck on a team with Tion and Knight and Jackie Love, and it's really hard to be the shining factor in games like that, but it's definitely worth noting that it's really hard to play top lane for a team that is as aggressive as top esports if you're not all in and if you're not a very, very mechanically talented player. And Wayward, I think, held up his end of the bargain very well. The other honorable mentions, the other top 3, I think for me, easily go to OMG Shanji in the top lane here. Shanji obviously showing a lot throughout the season with his crazy picks. Obviously, the Shyvana is the one that a lot of people are going to go to, but the Rumble coming out in recent weeks as well. Definitely something that's been very fun to watch with Shanji, so he's definitely an honorable mention here. And then Yao Yao for Thunder Talk, who I think is going to get probably less exposure than he should after a really, really good year for Thunder Talk. He came in along with Kepler into that bottom lane and turned that team around, almost got them into playoffs. They controlled their own destiny throughout the second half of that split, but unfortunately, they just missed out, and I think Yao Yao's going to get less credit than he maybe deserves because of that factor, but I want to give him his due here, so he is coming in third in my Rookie of the Year voting. But for me, Wayward was a very clear number 1, and he absolutely deserves the award this year. Moving on from the main awards, we now get to jump into our all-pro teams and my all-pro selections. Not only am I doing the first team, I'm doing the second team, I'm doing the third team, but of course, we have to start off with the best of the best. Who made first team all-pro in summer of 2022 in the LPL, in my opinion? Well, it's up on the screen now. You've got 369 of JD Gaming, Kanavi of JD Gaming in the jungle, Knight of Top Esports in the mid lane, Viper of Edward Gaming in the bot lane, and Ming of RNG at support. I really think this was the easiest selection of all of the all-pro teams. These 5 were very clearly, in my opinion, the standout players in their role all year long. We'll go from top to support here. 369 had a complete career resurgence this year in his first year on JD Gaming. This team as a whole was able to surprise a lot of people with just how amazing they were. But 369, I think, really cemented himself as one of, if not the best top laner in the region. He's been able to destroy pretty much everybody in lane, and he's one of the few top laners, I think, that has consistently been able to take a lane lead and translate that to teamfight success. So definitely feel like he's deserving of a first-team all-pro slot. You move on to Kanavi in the jungle. I really don't think this one is going to cause a lot of waves either. There was really no jungler in the league that was able to take over the game here in summer, nearly to the level of what Kanavi was able to accomplish for JDG. They play almost their entire strategy around him and around making sure that wherever he is at, that is getting the attention. Whether that means that you get missing roaming with him as the support, or you get Yagao playing a lot with him as the mid laner. Kanavi is always the focal point of JDG, and he did a great job of being the back that carried the rest of that team. Not to say that anybody else on the team played bad, but again, when you're the resource carry, it can be a really, really daunting task to be one of the best teams in the league, and Kanavi did that. Obviously, there were a lot of question marks about his ability. He took a huge dip in 2021, very similar to 369, but 2022 has shown that Kanavi is just as good as ever, and I'm excited to see him, hopefully, on the international stage. Mid lane, Knight, I just talked about him. He's the MVP of the split. It should take no surprise to show you that he's first team All-Pro. He was phenomenal for Top Esports. Not only were they the best team, he was so clearly the best player in the league, dominating in lane, out of lane. Already described all that, so I don't want to waste too much time on him there. You have Viper in the bottom lane. A lot of people might be surprised by this pick because EDG aren't nearly as good as, of course, they were last year, or as maybe expectations for this team were going to be at. But Viper was phenomenal, whether or not the team was always following up or not. Mako, his support struggled for a considerable amount of the split, and yet Viper's laning stats are pretty much incredible. Not only are they pretty much untouchable, but go watch it. He backs it up on film here. His team fight positioning is perfect. This is still the Viper that we know and love, and is very, very much in that consideration for not only the best ADC in the LPL, but one of the best AD carries in the world. And I think a lot of people are going to doubt him after this year. Hopefully he can prove a lot of them wrong in playoffs. And then, number one for support, for me, it was pretty easily Ming. I've been hyping up Ming all year long. Ming was phenomenal. It feels like every single year Ming gets better, and that's insane to say for someone who's been playing as long as he has, but truthfully, the difference between Ming and an average support for RNG might be top 4. Like, Ming had that much of an impact on the way RNG was able to play the game. Not only did he make Gallo look phenomenal in lane. Not to say Gallo's a bad laner. You know, a lot of people are going to take that out of context. But not to say Gallo's a bad laner, but that laning phase was ridiculously strong, and Ming was a huge part of that. But also, their team fight ability predicates a lot on Ming's ability to play these super aggressive champions like Renata that are able to kind of take over the fight and capitalize on any enemy positioning mistakes. Ming does a great job of making sure that the enemy can never be out of position, or else he is going to dominate. And so this is my first team All-Pro, and honestly, I'm very happy with how it looks. This All-Pro team is the one I am the most confident on. These 5 absolutely deserve their position here. Well, that was my first All-Pro team. Let's move on to my second team All-Pro, and this one was a little bit more controversial. There are going to be a few controversial takes in this video, and I think this starts it off. There are a couple on here that I think some people aren't going to love, but up on the screen right now, you're going to see it. In the top lane for my second team All-Pro, you've got Rich from Victory 5. In the jungle, Tian from Top Esports. In the mid lane, Xiaohu from RNG. In the bot lane, Light from LNG, and then at support, PP God from Victory 5. We'll go from top to support again, just like we did before. Rich makes second team All-Pro. I think the top lane pool was a little bit dry in the LPL, at least in my opinion, in terms of like viable, like really solid, amazing top laners. But Rich had a really good split. Still kind of the player that we all know him to be. He had that big emergence in spring this year, and I think he kind of carried that over for the most part here in summer. He had a really good beginning of the split, kind of tapered off along with Victory 5 for the most part towards the second half, but I still think he deserves it. While his laning phase may not be nearly as good as a lot of the other top laners that maybe I'm putting him over, you could make a real argument that he has been the best team-fighting top laner in the world so far this year. The amount that he can help out his team on the Gnar, on the Sejuani, on the Gwen, all of these picks that have been super meta right now, Rich does a very good job of being able to take over games on them, whether he has gold or not from laning phase. A very, very solid player that I think is just going to consistently give you a lot, and, you know, was really consistent, I think, for most of the year for a very good Victory 5 team. In the jungle, we have Tian. He is a very, very, very good player. Talk about someone who has just completely revamped his image. By the end of last year, we were talking about Tian as if like, oh, this guy's career is over. He's had a ludicrous amount of wrist injuries over the course of his career, and it just doesn't seem like he's ever going to get back to that top form where he was World Finals MVP, right? But, I mean, if he hasn't gotten back to it, he's gotten pretty darn close. This was one of his best splits in a very long time, and I'm very impressed with how he's been able to sync up with Knight. Those two have formed basically an impenetrable jungle mid duo here. Probably the best jungle mid duo in the world. Knight being first team, Tian being second team here. Both of them absolutely deserve it. It is awesome to see Tian bounce back, and hopefully he can maintain his form not only through playoffs, but hopefully internationally as well. And then you have Xiaohu here in the mid lane. This was somebody who I think for most of the split kind of flew a little bit under the radar, even though RNG was doing well. Mostly because out of the top 4 teams, it really was RNG that never felt the most flashy about their wins. At no point did I ever go, maybe this RNG team is actually the best team in the LPL, which is kind of crazy considering they just won MSI and they won the LPL in spring. But Xiaohu really turned it on, especially towards the back half of the season. Obviously, we know that he's a great spring performer, but his summer performance basically lived up to that here. In 2022, he was the best performing member, maybe outside of Ming, on that RNG team. And, you know, I absolutely think he deserves to be second team here. The controversial pick, I think for a lot of people here, is going to be Light in the bottom lane. I don't think a lot of people are going to like seeing him second team over players like Fodic, over players like Gala. But I think if you just look at what he was able to accomplish this year and not necessarily quote-unquote the power ranking tier list of how good those players are, I think you'll find that Light was significantly more important to his team than either Fodic or Gala was. So he gets my second team All-Pro nod. LNG would not be anywhere near the playoffs without Light. He was phenomenal for a majority of this year. Whether it was no top laner here with Pandasy playing, whether it was switching supports in and out. You know, you had Iwandi at the beginning of the year. You went to Lumao, and Lumao kind of settled in here. Like, he's had to go through so much turmoil, the losing streak that LNG went on. And yet, all the while, he was always performing, always the carry of this LNG team. I think he's really emerged as one of the more talented AD carries in the world, and I don't think he gets nearly the credit that he deserves. So hopefully, I can give him a little bit here by voting him on my second team All-Pro. And then finally, PP God. It feels bad that he doesn't get to be first team, but Ming was so good for a majority of the year that unfortunately PP God falls down here to the second team. He was phenomenal. Arguably a top 5, top 7-ish player in the LPL over the course of the past few weeks, and he absolutely deserves this. Victory 5 definitely went through a few of their ruts of their own. You know, at the beginning of the year, they were firing on all cylinders. They had Dream in, and PP God was going absolutely nuts in that support position. You bring Rookie back in, they continue to go absolutely ham against all of these other teams, but they hit a little bit of a wall. Who's performing through all that? Of course, it's PP God. I think you can make a real case that he's been the best player on Victory 5 all year long, and I think I personally would be the one to make that case. I think him versus Rookie, kind of up in the air, but PP God, I think, definitely deserves all the honor and award that he gets here, and I think he's a shoo-in for second team All-Pro if he's not a first team All-Pro. So these are the 5 that I chose for second team, but now we get to move on to our third team. That brings us to our third team for All-Pro in the LPL of summer 2022, and we've got some spicy choices on this as well. It's going to be up on the screen now. I'll go over it. In the top lane, I've got Bin from Bilbili Gaming. In the jungle, Xiaohao from Anyone's Legend. In the mid lane, Yagao from JD Gaming. In the bot lane, Gala from RNG, and at support, On from Weibo Gaming. Now, I imagine almost all of these picks are going to be relatively controversial, but I'm going to go from top to support, kind of explaining why I think they deserve to be in the top 3 of their roles, respectively. And you're probably going to notice a little bit of a trend with how I talk about all this. So, let's start with Bin in the top lane for BLG. BLG was an absolute train wreck for a majority of this year. They didn't control their own destiny of even making playoffs, and really a lot of it was out of their own hands. But you know what? Bin was phenomenal for this team. There were so many games that I can't even count on my hand the amount of games that they just wouldn't have been in without his presence in the top lane, without his team fighting ability, his immaculate laning. There was a reason that he was on the champions in spring. It's because he can make plays like he made all year long. And something I really value, which you're going to notice a lot with the rest of these All-Pro selections for third team, is if you are easily the best player on a team and you are actively making that team viable pretty much on your own, I absolutely think you deserve credit for that. So Bin, pretty much in my opinion, made BLG viable. He is the reason that they're in playoffs right now. I don't think they would be there without him. And yes, you could talk about Crisp having a good year, and I thought Crisp was fine, but there was just no consistency with pretty much anybody else on the team other than Bin, and I absolutely think he deserves his honors here on third team for what he was able to do with that BLG team. Very similarly here, I think you can talk about Xiao Hao. Now, unfortunately, the ending of the season for Anyone's Legend is going to put a damper on what I think was a real breakout season for Xiao Hao, but at the end of the day, I can only grade his performance individually, and the fact that AL didn't make the playoffs, I think, is not going to deter me from putting him in my all-pro team here, because truly, this team never in a million years should have even been considered for playoffs with the talent level that they had, but Xiao Hao stepped up so much and was such a hard carry for a majority of this split. The early season of this split, the first 10 or 11 series that they ran, I think you could have made a real case that Xiao Hao was first or second team caliber jungler in this region. He was phenomenal for AL. Obviously, the team really stuttered down the stretch and couldn't really keep up with the rest of the teams when their schedule got a lot harder, but even in those losses, I really don't think many of them were Xiao Hao's fault. I talked about this in my weekly recaps video. He's going to get a bad rap because AL really started to disintegrate down the stretch, but he was still really, really good here, and I think it would be undeserving to give this to anybody else above him. And so for me, Xiao Hao is going to be my third team jungler. Moving into the mid lane position, this is where it gets interesting. I spoiled this a little bit earlier, obviously, but Yagao is going to be my third team All-Pro. That means no Rookie on my All-Pro teams, and that was a really tough choice to make here between Yagao and Rookie, but at the end of the day, Rookie missing the beginning part of the season, I do think affects his grade here. Yagao has been phenomenal throughout the course of the entire season, and I think he's honestly been a little bit underrated for the contributions that he's been given on JD Gaming. Obviously, Kanavi is the engine that they run through there on JDG, but Yagao is really the one piloting that engine. He has been phenomenal. It's easily, in my opinion, the best split of his career. I think at worst, he was a top 5 player in the LPL this year, and he absolutely deserves to be on third team. I think if anybody now is sleeping on how Yagao has played for a majority of the summer split, then they are simply just too far behind. He has been phenomenal, and he has proven it over and over again. He very, very much deserves to be here, and he probably deserves to be higher, but unfortunately, you know, mid lane's a little bit of a tough position to crack in the LPL. Bot lane here was a little bit up in the air for me. I ended up settling on Gala here for my third team. Obviously, there are a lot of people that probably want to see Photic here. There are a lot of people that I think want to see Huanfeng here. All three of them played a very, very good split. And while Huanfeng I thought was more of a central focus for his team, I think Gala overall performed the best out of any of the bot laners. His team fighting is still immaculate. He is a phenomenal positioner. And I think you can make a real argument that he is the most talented AD carry in the region. However, RNG just didn't play through him a lot this split, so he falls down to third team. Obviously, you could make a case that he's better than Light, or that he's better than Viper as a player, but in terms of the output, which is what All-Pro represents in my opinion, is how they performed in the summer split, not necessarily how good do I think this player is. I think Gala falls a lot closer here to the third team, so unfortunately, he's going to fall down here. Sorry to all the Photic fans who are going to continue to be mad at me in the comments for not putting him on an All-Pro team. And then, moving to support, we've got On, somebody who I've been a huge fan of all year long. Obviously, Weibo plays a very feast or famine style of game, and On, I think, is a direct contributor to that. Not only is the Shy a huge contributor to that, and some people will want to see the Shy in my All-Pro teams. However, I think he just had a few too many games that were really, really awful for me to consider him in the top 3 here, but On, I actually think was really consistent in the support position. Him and Huanfeng formed a really good duo. I was really concerned about their synergy in spring. It didn't feel like they were always on the same page, but they very much came together in summer, and I think a lot of that was On's hyper-aggressiveness and willingness to make plays not only in the bot lane, but around the map as well. He had a very good synergy with SOFM, and I think he is a key integral piece to what Weibo Gaming wants to do in terms of their strategies. He's really good at being aggressive, he's really good on engaged champions, but he also plays the Renata and the Enchanters rather well. So overall, I think On's game is honestly slept on by a majority of LPL fans, and I think he's very much deserving of this third spot in the LPL All-Pro team. But I'm sure you all have your disagreements, you all have your things that you don't like about my All-Pro teams. Go ahead and leave those disagreements down in the comment section below. I love having that conversation with you guys, but this is definitively my top 3 players of the summer split in all 5 roles. That's going to do it for my award predictions. We've now gone over my MVP pick, my Rookie of the Year pick, and of course, all three of my All-Pro teams. That means we can now jump into my team analysis, my overview and analysis of all of the 10 teams that made playoffs. 1 to 6 will be done right now, and then we're going to get into some of the matchups that 7 through 10 have. If you're excited for that, stick around. But we're going to kick things off here of our team analysis section with the regular season champions, the #1 team in the regular season. Of course, I am talking about Top Esports coming in at #1, and they came in hot and fired up. They looked so good for a majority of the regular season, and they kind of stumbled a bit towards the back half. You'll see this segment is a little bit familiar to you guys if you watched my mid-season player rankings video, but instead of ranking the players here, we're going to be going over a lot more of what happened in the regular season for this team. So not only did this team kind of coast, I think for a majority of the regular season, they looked dominant, especially against worse teams. However, there is an exception to that because if you'll notice, their biggest win of the split is RNG. They didn't beat either JD Gaming or Victory 5 in the regular season. Now that is a little bit concerning because going 1-2 against the other top 4 teams in the region isn't always a sign that maybe you are the best. Maybe you're just the best at beating up the worst teams. It's certainly going to be something to look at. But how does this team play? We've already talked about it a little bit when it comes to the all-pro teams, but Knight and Tian are the focal point for everything that this team wants to do. Of course, Knight is the best player in the LPL, so you want him to be getting resources. You want him to be getting opportunities. Tian does a very good job of making sure he has those, and whether or not those opportunities get funneled through mid and Knight becomes the carry, or whether they get funneled through Tian and Tian becomes a carry, or whether they both use their lane advantage that they typically have to move to the bottom lane and help out someone like a Jackie Love who absolutely can carry games. This team has a very clear strategy, and that's wherever Knight is, the resources are going. And it has very, very much worked out for them in the regular season. Not only were they dominant against the lower teams, but they were dominant against the middle tier teams as well. They obliterated EDG, they obliterated Weibo Gaming. Those games weren't even really that close. And it was mostly because if you don't really have the talent level in every lane to match up with Top Esports, they are going to take advantage of it somewhere. Now, that's not to say they don't have any weaknesses at all, because Knight and Tian and Jackie Love and Mark are all great players, but they are all very aggressive and they all can be taken advantage of, especially this bottom lane. We actually saw it very recently with their loss of the split here against Victory 5 in Week 10. A really rough loss for them, and mostly because Jackie Love and Mark were playing that aggressive style, and it very much did not work out for them. These two players like to play heavy aggro, and if you can counterpunch that bot lane, you can sometimes run into problems where the enemy bot lane can get a little bit out of control, and the rest of the team has some trouble handling that. Of course, we also have to point out that their top laner is a rookie in Wayward, and Wayward did play well for a majority of the split, but down the stretch, especially in Week 10 here, he was a problem for this Top Esports team, so much so that he was actually benched for their final series of the year. Now, I don't think that will continue on for playoffs. Wayward has been overall a huge positive for this Top Esports team, but it is worth noting that he's not this unbelievable laner on the same level of someone like a Knight or a Jackie Love. He's a very good laner, and one of the best players at his position, but definitely someone that good teams could be able to take advantage of. So those are the positives, those are the negatives. Where do I think this team stands overall? I think they have a very good shot at winning the LPL. When you have Knight and when you have Tian and when you're linked up like this, you are never going to be out of a championship window, and as long as those two players can keep connecting and keep playing to the best of their abilities, I really think this team should be the favorite to win the LPL title come the end of playoffs and do really well at Worlds in that same vein. Moving on to our second place team in the regular season here. And it's a team I've actually been very excited to talk about, one that I think I'm a lot higher on than maybe a majority of fans. That is JD Gaming. JDG here, coming in second. Obviously the same record here as Top Esports, but a little bit worse of a game score, so they fall in here at second place. They were very up and down, I think, over the course of the split. Mostly up, though. Obviously only 2 losses. Their win of the split, of course, they took a victory off of Top Esports, a huge win for this JDG team, until you look at it and you go, oh, it was week 1. It was forever ago. It's been forever since we've seen the top 2 teams in the region actively play each other. It's going to be very fun to see if we can get that matchup in the playoffs. Their biggest loss this split is something that definitely concerns me. They did lose to FPX in week 4, But we have to remember, if we want context, that was during FPX's big resurgence. That was basically the week or the week after they signed Summit, and Summit came in, and they were looking like world beaters. They had gone on that 0-7 or an 0-6 start, and they were really starting to feel themselves again. FPX was kind of clicking, and JDG was a little bit weaker in that respect. I think they've really found their footing over the course of the rest of the split, but where you look at this JDG team in terms of strengths, I think is just the talent. 369 has been outclassing everybody in the top lane, and I don't expect that to change at all. Kanavi is the most talented jungler in the world. I will say that. I really don't think that's up for much debate. The ability with which he can control the game and just absolutely delete what the enemy wants to do, it's really impressive to watch. There is not a lot of junglers in the world that can actively go up against Kanavi and stop him because he is so successful at what he does. Yagao is a big part of that as well. Yagao probably gets underrated. I think I talked about this a little bit in the All-Pro segment. In the grand scheme of things, Yagao is such a talented player, and not just on supportive picks. You see, he was 12-3. That Ahri pick was huge for him this year, and he was given a lot of resources on that pick. He did a very good job of maximizing his efficiency, and his damage numbers were honestly surprisingly great this year. So that trio right there is an all-pro caliber trio, and all of them were in the MVP conversation for me. That should tell you how good this top side for JDG is. Now, you would think that would mean that Hope and Missing were kind of a weak spot, maybe something to worry about with this JDG team. But honestly, Hope has been surprisingly great as a rookie coming in this year. Not a lot of people had a lot of hype for him, but he came in midway through spring and completely turned this JDG team around. There was not a lot of hype around this JDG team. I don't think a lot of people remember that. Going into spring, a lot of people, me included, had them closer to 8 or 9 than they did to 1 or 2, which is insane to say, but Hope coming in has really revitalized what a lot of this team wanted to do, and he's had a great chemistry with Missing, who is one of the most underrated supports in the league. Obviously doesn't crack my All-Pro team, but still a very, very talented support on a very talented team. Really, I think the big benefit for JDG is the lack of weaknesses directly in their roster. I think everybody from 1 to 5 can really hold their own against pretty much any lane matchup and any team in the world, and that is something that I don't think pretty much any other team in the league can actively say. So, what are their weaknesses? If they don't really have any player weaknesses, what is the problem with this team? Well, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the history of JD Gaming, which is the fact that this team has consistently choked under pressure in high-pressure scenarios, with the exception of 2020, where I think a lot of people forget how good they were in the 2020 playoffs. They just didn't have the Worlds run that I think everybody wanted them to have, but this team, I think, if they can break the expectation, if they can break the tradition of JDG teams kind of collapsing in big moments and not performing up to what they did in the regular season, then I think this team could actively be a huge contender and maybe even a favorite to be hoisting the LPL trophy by the end of the playoffs. Moving on to the number 3 team in the regular season here, and it's a team that I think is very happy to have clinched that number 3 spot, and it's going to be Victory 5. Now, V5 was in a really, really good spot for a majority of this split. However, they went on a little bit of a dip towards the middle of the split. They started to pick it up again towards the back half, which we'll talk about, but overall, I really don't know where I stand for this V5 team overall. So let's talk about what happened with them. Their win of the split actually just came this week. They beat up on TES. They beat up on Top Esports, which is a huge win for Victory 5. And unlike JD Gaming, who beat them up in week 1, they just did it. This was a full-fledged TES, a team that knew they were getting first place. And that's a huge win. That's a confidence-inspiring win that I think could very much propel them into a better spot mentally moving in to playoffs. However, this team has also shown more inconsistency than I think almost any other team in the top 4 here for the LPL. Their loss of the split here goes to OMG in week 8. That's a tough loss. OMG, while not being a bad team, is certainly not a team that you want to be losing to if you have ideas of winning the LPL split overall. And so, definitely some things to talk about with Victory 5. Let's talk about where their playstyle comes from. So, when you talk about V5, you have to talk about Rookie. He's the first one that comes to mind. They built this entire team basically around him, and he has done a really good job of being a catalyst. Not necessarily the focal point in the same way that someone like Knight is, for top esports because I think he definitely plays a different role than someone like Knight does. I think Rookie, while he is the best player, is significantly less resource heavy than a player like Knight. I think a lot of those resources tend to go to Photic, which is, good and bad, I think, for Victory 5. Photic is often given a ton of opportunity to win the game. And I think this jungle position is also given a lot of opportunity to win the game, but we'll get to the jungle position in a bit. Along with Rookie, I think the other main contributor towards the entire team looking great has to be PP at support. Obviously, a player that I think has gone completely under the radar after a bad year last year on BLG, comes back to V5 where he's basically the face of the organization, and he gets his form back basically immediately. Him and Photic have teamed up to form one of the more lethal bot lane duos in the league, or at least one of the more talented ones. And while PP God does a really good job of laning and having laning prowess, I think really his specialty comes in the fact that he teams up with Xiaolan Bao, he teams up with Rookie to take over a lot of spots on the map. Photic is often the recipient of a lot of those resources, but sometimes it is Rich. Sometimes it's even Xiaolan Bao, right? Like the versatility of, I think, how this team wants to play the game has been shown over the course of the season. Rookie is a very selfless player. I think for the most part, this jungle position is rather selfless, and PP God does a great job of enabling as well. So, you have so many people talking about giving up resources and being okay with not being the main carry. Well, where do the resources go? Like I said, oftentimes they go to this bottom lane, they go to Photic. Now, recently they have been a little bit less hesitant to do that unless Photic is dominating in lane, which he did against top esports. He obliterated Jackie Love, a very good sign, might I add, but you see a lot of the champions that he's played throughout the split. A lot of Kalista, a lot of Senna. Very interesting choices to be quote-unquote hyper carries, but Kalista has always been one of Photic's main picks. I expect to see a lot more Sivir, and I expect to see a lot more Lucian come out of them in playoffs. That's something they've been toying around with quite a bit towards the back half of the season, and it's definitely something that I'm considering seeing a lot of out of Victory 5, but Photic is really going to be the focal point for whether or not this V5 team can perform out of expectations, because at the end of the day, if he can step up and be one of the top 2 to 3 AD carries in the region like everybody wants him to be, then this team has a very good shot of not only, outplacing this third place, but potentially even winning the LPL title. However, Photic has yet to show in any major experience, in any major way, that he is able to come up in the clutch. The win against Top Esports was huge, but let's not forget that he had a very down playoffs in spring. This was somebody who I think a lot of people were ready to crown as one of the better ADCs in the region until he completely shit the bed in playoffs. So still a lot needs to be seen from Photic. They're putting a lot on him and a lot is expected of him. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for this team. You have Rich in the top lane, talked about him in the All-Pro team. Consistently inconsistent. That is what Rich is. You know exactly what you're going to get from Rich, which is the fact that he's not going to be good in lane. And when he goes up against the really dominant laners in the league, I'm talking 369, I'm talking the Shy, you can get into a situation where he is getting absolutely bodied. And that is concerning. But if he can get through that laning phase in a relatively good manner, you know he is going to be a good team fighter. We've seen him on the Gnar, we've seen him on the Sejuani. These are the picks that he can absolutely take over the late game with. He's one of the best team fighting tank players in the world right now. And if he can just get to that point, it's not going to be a problem. But as a team that may be trying to get to the finals, you're going to be going up against all of the best top laners in the region. Can Rich hold up? That's definitely a storyline I'm going to be waiting to see. And then, of course, we have to talk about the jungle position, because I have Xiaolan Bao listed here because it very much feels like he's going to play the entirety of the playoffs. But, of course, you still have Karsa on this team who seems to be benched, which is insane to me because I think Karsa has shown probably to be the better player throughout a majority of the split. But Xiaolan Bao is in, and I think maybe for V5, their thought process here is that Xiaolan Bao is definitely more of a resource taker. And Karsa is definitely not that. He is definitely a resource facilitator, and I think this team knows the game plan that it wants to go, and they want to put Rookie on like a Talia or a Silas or someone that can help out the rest of the team, help put the rest of the team in a really good position, help engage, help make macro plays. And Xiaolan Bao might be the recipient of a lot of those resources. A lot of Wukong, a lot of Xin Zhao from Xiaolan Bao over the course of the split. These are picks that can do a lot in the late game as long as he has the gold. So I can see why they might want to go with him, but overall, I'm just not super sold on his ability to be better than Karsa. And I think, honestly, him being in lowers the ceiling of this team, at least for me, by just a little bit. But overall, I still am decently high on Victory 5. I'm a little bit worried about the consistency game to game of this team, which makes me worried about their best of 5 prospects. But at the end of the day, when you have Rookie, when you have PP God, if Foda can really step up, this team could absolutely contend for an LPL title. They're just gonna have to have a lot of things go right for them in order to get to that point, in my opinion. Moving on to our number 4 team, and I've been talking about the top 4 as if it's some, mythical thing here, and I guess if it is, then we are closing off the top 4 here with my final top 4 team. RNG, Royal Never Give Up, coming in at number 4. They actually had a really good opportunity to come in at number 2 here, but they screwed up week 10, which obviously you can already see on the screen with the loss of the split. But yeah, this team, for the most part, was relatively consistent in the fact that they never really looked dominant at any point in the summer split, at least in my opinion. They were always a good team, but they never really had that signature win that made me feel super confident about their ability all season long. Their win of the split easily has to go to their win over JDG in week 8, a huge series win for them. However, if you remember, I went over that in my weekly review. JDG was honestly the better team in this series. RNG just did some really cute moves towards the end and JDG threw a bit here, and RNG was able to pick up the series win, although I'm not sure if it's the most dominant win that they've ever had. At the same time, a win's a win, so I'm not going to take it away from them. And then you have the loss of the split, which has to be the LGD loss in the last series of the year. The last series of the year here in the LPL, they actually take an L to LGD, which is huge. If they win that series, they come into the playoffs here at number 2, which is a huge advantage. Number 2, obviously, not only gets a free first round bye, they basically get an extra game here, but they put themselves in a position where they're automatically in loser's bracket even if they lose their first series, which is a much more enviable position than RNG having to beat up on whoever, comes out of their side of the bracket in order to get into that spot. So definitely unfortunate for RNG, but it was in their own control. So let's go over how this team likes to play. This team likes to play very, very safe, I think, for the most part. Xiaohu does a really good job of being the facilitator, kind of similar to what Rookie was able to do, but I think he does a lot better with resources, or at least the team is more willing to give him resources on picks like Talia, on picks like Lissandra. Like, typically when Rookie plays the Talia, they are often trying to have Rookie facilitate and make sure that Rookie doesn't get those resources, but I think the opposite can kind of be said for Xiaohu, where oftentimes he will play the Talia and he will get ganks, and they want to get him kills on that Talia, or they'll want to get him kills on that Lissandra. Obviously, he's not the only carry on this team, but it is something worth noting that even though he is out here playing a lot more of the supportive mages types, he still is really, really good with resources, and this team is still very prepared to dump into him in order for them to win, and he's obviously their best player. Then you look at their bot lane, which of course might be the most talented or one of the most talented bot lanes in the LPL. Gala and Ming are absolutely nuts. Ming was my number 1 support for a reason. His split so far has been unbelievable. Their success rate on Lucian Nami is absurd. I believe they're 5-0 this year on Lucian Nami. Not only is their laning phase great, I talked about how Gala is one of the best positioning team fighters in the region, and he shows that off on picks like the Aphelios, on his signature Jinx. Things like that, I think he does a great job showing that late game can often come down to Gala, and he does a really good job of making sure that things go according to plan. My biggest fault with Gala and Ming as a duo is sometimes they are risk averse, or a little too risk averse in lane. And what I mean by that is I think more so than almost any other top bot lane in the region, they are totally fine going completely even into the late game. And that can be good, that can also be bad, because oftentimes, it can be good because it means RNG can put their resources elsewhere. Wei can often go top lane and try to help out that lane. They can really focus on the mid lane. But it can also be bad because if you have a lane that's losing, oftentimes Gala's never going to be in that position where he's going to be able to take over the game super easily on the Aphelios or on the Jinx, mostly because of all of these situations, the lack of resources that I think they dump into him early. I think this team would be wise in just going bot over and over and over again, but it really doesn't seem like they typically want to do that, at least in recent weeks. The top side of this map, I think, is a little bit weaker. This is where I start to get a little concerned. Not only has Wei definitely taken a step back, I think overall this split from what he showed in spring and what he showed last year, I'm not super concerned about him overall because I still think he's a good player, but at the end of the day, he's got his play style. He is very much like, I'm going to play the bruisers. I'm going to be pseudo frontline that wants to go in and engage and start things off and have a little bit of appeal. You know, the Viegos, the Vi's, the Wukongs, like those picks are what Wei really, really excels at. And it's not a lot outside of that, but that's fine. Like, if you can play those well, then play them. I just worry about his flexibility in a best of 5. And then you have Breathe, obviously the only new addition to this team in summer. In ways, I think this is an upgrade, and in other ways, I think it's a downgrade. It was an upgrade in the sense of Breathe is a much better resourceless player than I think Bin was for this team. He's going to be much better on picks like the Gnar and on the Gangplank, where you just kind of sit him up top lane, and eventually he'll be relevant. Obviously, Breathe is a player I like in that regard, but Bin is a carry, and I think RNG maybe overestimated their ability to pump resources into other parts of the map when they let go of Bin. Bin was a really good contributor for this team throughout spring, maybe not so much at MSI, but throughout spring, in terms of being the one that they could pump a lot into, and he would give out a lot in team fights, whereas Xiaohu could be more supportive. Gala and Ming don't need all of this pressure because they can win 2v2. Right, like, I think that maybe had a little bit better of a dynamic, but you bring Breathe in here. Breathe is someone who they don't often invest into, and that means a lot of the pressure often goes into the mid lane now. Now, again, like I said, I don't think that's a bad thing. Xiaohu is this team's best player, but I am a little bit worried about this top side getting a little bit outplayed. Wei, at multiple points in the season, has been outplayed in the jungle, even though RNG has won. That is something to be concerned about, and Breathe, we know, can be beaten in lane. It's not like he is some unbeatable top laner. Now, I don't think that completely destroys RNG's chances. I think their bot side is so good of Xiaohu, Gala, and Ming that they always are going to be in a good opportunity to win games. However, I do think that they can be exploited in best of 5s. It's something I'm definitely going to be interested in seeing. Overall, do I think this team can contend for the LPL title? Yes. I think any team in the top 4 realistically has a chance at winning the LPL title. However, I don't know if I would put them, in my opinion, on the same level as a team like Top Esports or a team like JD Gaming. I think they have a few more holes and definitely a few more inconsistencies that I'm worried about, especially with their recent form. However, if they can turn that all around, we saw what this team can do in terms of when they're playing at their absolute best. They were MSI champions for a reason, so hopefully they can get back to that form and less of the form that we saw against LGD in Week 10. Moving on to the team that finished 5th in the regular season here, we are talking about our reigning world champions here. Of course, I'm talking about EDG, Edward Gaming. They come in at 5th, which I think is both good and bad for the long-term outlook of this team. At points, they looked significantly worse than 5th, which you can see in my power rankings. And I think towards the end of the season, they really started to get it together. They really started to find a mentality that I think worked for them a lot more. Obviously, their win of the split here over Weibo in Week 2 looks pretty good now, but at the time, it really wasn't that impressive. Weibo wasn't kind of firing on all cylinders, and other than that, they really don't have any huge wins. They've just looked really solid against every team that they should beat, with the exception of their loss to OMG. I think that was a pretty rough loss for this team. This was during the time around the mid-season that OMG was really starting to emerge as a team that I think a lot of people were really seeing like, oh, like, they're actually good. And, you know, the win over EDG really helped solidify that, but at the end of the day, I don't think either this win or this loss are too indicative of the EDG that we're getting now. Not only have they made a roster change with Junjia coming in the jungle for JJ, but I think overall their philosophy and their mentality of how they want to play the game has really evolved and adapted over the course of the last few series overall, probably the last 3 or so weeks, I would say. So let's talk about their positives and the way they like to play the game. Previously, with JJ in, they wanted to play the game mostly around Scout. They really, really wanted to put Scout on something like an Azir or a Corki and have him unlocked and have him go over the map and be able to take over wherever he needs to. That was their strategy last year as well when they won a World Championship. There was a reason Scout was named Finals MVP. He was given a lot of resources in that World title run, and he did a lot with it. Obviously, Scout's a very good player, but I just don't know if the meta right now really lent itself into Scout playing the Azir and being able to just kind of take over in the late game with the Corki in that same manner, right? I think you needed to be a little bit more proactive in terms of the early 15-minute part of the game in your mid lane positioning in order for you to have the same kind of impact on the game as a whole. So Junjia comes in, they basically completely flipped their strategy here, and now bot lane is the central focus of a lot of what this EDG team wants to do, especially in the early game, and I think it has helped them out a ton. Not only is Viper easily their best player, and I think he's been for quite a while, but when Viper gets a lead, he does a very good job of strangleholding that on the enemy team. He does a great job of transitioning any lead that he has into the late game. I think he is easily the most complete player in the LPL in terms of laning phase and then team fighting, like every facet of the game, positioning, macro. Viper just gets it. He knows exactly where he needs to be at any point in time. He does a great job laning. He's one of the toughest laners to lane into. Mako helps with that, obviously, as well. But he's also great in team fights. So if he gets that lead, which he is very likely to get that lead, if he's getting jungle attention, you can pretty much rely on him to be able to keep it. That's the positive. Now, the negative for this team has been the inconsistency, I think, overall from all 5 of their players. There have been moments in the season where I think a majority of their players have looked bad, maybe with the exception of Viper. You've had moments where Mako has really been a problem for this EDG team and has basically cost Viper some leads himself because he's given so much gold over to the enemy bot laners. You've had moments where Scout just doesn't look connected. He'll try to play the things like the Azir and the Corki when they're not particularly strong, and he just gets to the point in the game where it's like, oh, I'm not, like, the rest, I may have gold, but everybody on the enemy team has gold because they were able to split it a lot easier. Flandre, I think, has gotten significantly better in recent weeks, but he started off the year very poorly. He's not necessarily the tank player that I think a lot of other teams in the top, section have right now. And tanks overall are just strong. The Ornn, the Sejuani, the Gnar, these are really, really good picks overall right now, and I just don't know that Flandre is as experienced on picks like that. Obviously, we know him for, like, the Gragas and the Gangplank. Those are going to be more Flandre-style picks, and obviously those things can still work, but it's going to be interesting to see if he can adapt and maybe play a little bit more of these tank-style top laners if he has to in order to give players like Viper more of an opportunity to have those late-game team fights. It's just there's a lot of question marks on this team. There have been points in the season where this team has looked a cohesive 5, and they looked very good from top to bottom, and I think in their benefit, a lot of those experiences have happened recently, like within the last 2 or 3 weeks. They have really kind of stepped up. Mako has looked a ton better. Scout has looked a ton better. Flandre has looked a ton better. And Junjia has unlocked everything. I think if they can maintain the form that they had, there's a very real chance that they could beat RNG if they put themselves in an opportunity like that in bracket. And that would be awesome for this team. It would give them a much better shot at actively making the World Championships, which has to be their goal, obviously being the reigning World Champions. It's just, there are a few too many question marks, most notably the fact that they really couldn't hold a candle to any of the other top 4 teams throughout the year that have me questioning what the ceiling of this EDG team is. Obviously, if they can get everything together, I really do think they have the best chance of any of these other teams to actively beat and contend with those top 4 teams, but a lot of those things do have to go right, so it's more of a wait-and-see approach here with EDG overall. Moving into our number 6 team in the standings, our final team here that I'm going to give a pseudo recap to because we've got some matchup analysis coming up. Of course, I'm talking about Weibo Gaming, the hot and cold team of the LPL, the team, the Feast or Famine, whatever you want to call them. They're fun to watch, and they are certainly never boring. That is something I can definitely say. You can pretty much see that from their win of the split and their loss of the split. Their win of the split is against Victory 5. It's a huge win in Week 6, pretty much right when Victory 5 was starting to hit their peak. Weibo Gaming kind of started their dip, if we're being honest, and it was a huge win at the time, and it feels even bigger now. And then you have the loss of the split against Anyone's Legend in Week 5, a week before they lost to a team that ended up not even making playoffs. It's definitely an up and down split for Weibo overall, but you could probably guess that just from the players who are on this team. I think if you watch the LPL, you don't really need me to tell you what their playstyle is. It's go, 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 go. The top and the bot lanes on this team play so aggressive and play so forward that it really puts the other 2 members of this team in a really tough predicament, but we'll get to that. The good parts of this team is how freaking talented they are. The talent on this team in terms of just pure mechanical skill is pretty much unrivaled by anybody that isn't like top esports and JD Gaming. Like, they are that good. The Shy is probably the best top laner in terms of just pure skill. Now, sometimes he turns his brain off, but in terms of pure skill, I don't know how many people can beat the Shy when he is at his absolute best. Very similar things can be said about Huanfeng and On in the bottom lane. Those two lanes are so dominant in terms of if they just get the straight 1v1 or if they just get the straight 2v2, oftentimes they will do such a good job of being able to win that. However, because of the way that they play, because they play so aggressive and so foot on the gas all the time, oftentimes other teams can take advantage of that. If other teams know to play a little bit more passive, to give up, a 10 or a 20 CS lead a little bit, and maybe get the Shy out of position, you can bring the jungler top side over and over again, and he's gonna be exploitable. You can bring the jungler bot side over and over again, and they're gonna be exploitable. And it is really up to SOFM and Angel to be able to corral that pressure, to be able to say, okay, we know the Shy and Wanfeng and On are gonna be super far up. We need to make sure that they are in a position where they're not gonna be punished for this kind of play, where their leads can stand, where they can go into the late game, up a kill, up 2 kills, up 50 CS, because they can do that. And when SOFM and Angel do that successfully, I think this team is on a completely different level. Like, they were able to beat V5. I think they would absolutely be able to beat almost anybody in the league if they were playing like that. One of the most fun teams to watch when everything is clicking. However, we have often seen the inability for a player like SOFM to get ahead in his jungle matchup because, quite frankly, he doesn't have that, that I'm just gonna go factor. He much prefers to play that more supportive role. And oftentimes that can be a little bit of an issue here on this Weibo team because let's say the other jungler gets a little bit ahead. Well, all of a sudden the Shy and Wanfeng and On, those spots where they can get taken advantage of are much easier to take advantage of because of the fact that the other jungler's ahead. So if SOFM can get ahead in matchups, he's played so much Viego this year. If he can get ahead in matchups like that, I often think that this team has a very good shot to win. But when he doesn't, this team also has just as good a shot to lose by a billion, to get completely run over. I think Angel's in a similar boat. We often see a lot of roaming mid laners from him. We can see him on the Azir, and things like that. But often, the pick that I think most people associate him with is the Twisted Fate. Obviously, he has a very good Zoe as well. But those are the things that you really think about with Angel, where it's not these lane dominant picks that are going to beat you early. It's these things that can really help out their team, and eventually, if they get to the late game, can really help the rest of the team kind of facilitate a win. And I think that overall, we know what the Shy gives you. We know what Wanfeng and On give you. It's really about those two, in my opinion. If those two can step up and be actively good supporting players, which at times this year they are, and at other times this year they very much have not been. I've been very critical of what SOFM and Angel have been doing this year. But if they can step up and be good supporting pieces to the rest of these players, I actually think that Weibo could beat pretty much anybody in the playoffs. But on that same token, if they don't show up, Weibo could very much not win a series in playoffs as well. I think the feast or famine ability of this team is higher than pretty much anybody in the world, and for that reason, they're going to be one of the more interesting and fun teams to watch in the playoffs, but also for that same reason, they might be incredibly boring when they get 0-3 swept, or if they just 3-0 completely steamroll somebody. So it's really up for debate whether or not you're in or out on this Weibo Gaming team. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. It's very much going to depend on the matchups, but at the end of the day, this is a team that very well could be in the top 4 and could also not win a series, which is always fun when it comes to playoff predicting. Okay, now that we've gone over the top 6 teams, all of whom have buys in the first round because of the way the LPL playoffs work, we can finally get into my first round matchup analysis. We've got 2 series to talk about here, and both of them are very intriguing. The first one I'm going to go with is going to be our matchup between 8 and 9. Of course, I'm talking about OMG taking on FunPlus Phoenix. Now, up on the screen, you're going to see both teams. You're going to see the champions they play. I'm going to give you a little bit of a matchup rundown. We're also going to go over a key matchup in one of these lanes between 2 players that I think really could tilt the tide of the series here. But of course, this best of 5 is going to be incredibly interesting to watch. These two did play each other. Obviously, everybody in the LPL plays each other once in the round robin of the regular season. OMG did take that series 2-1 back in week 6. It was a very interesting series to watch, but at the end of the day, it was Shanji being able to completely take over on his Shyvana that really turned the tide of what OMG was capable of doing. Now, I think both teams are definitely in different spots than they were in week 6. Week 6 was kind of the rise of OMG, and it started the fall of FPX. I think both teams have kind of settled into a very similar spot. obviously sitting at different records here. But even so, I think there are a lot of similarities between these two teams. I think both of them had reasonable expectations going into the split. OMG maybe not as high as FPX's, but I think both really were kind of investing in this year, and they thought that they would be able to do it. And then both got surprise performances maybe out of some players that they weren't expecting. I think for OMG, obviously, Shanji and Cream have been the two for them all year long that have really been able to carry a lot of what this team wants to do. And then for FPX, I think, at least in their successful parts, it's been a lot of Clid and Care. It's been this jungle mid duo that has really taken over, with Summit being a proxy good player in the top lane. I really think that there are a lot of interesting matchups here, but I think some things to point out about how these two teams will likely go about this matchup. Not only will OMG heavily be targeted in draft, these bans are going to be heavy, but they're going to have to hit, because OMG has so many comfort picks. That's really what's become their staple, is that they've really learned to play the game their own way. And I think that's really unlocked a lot of what they're able to do. Not only do you have to ban, so let's go over all the picks you have to ban against OMG. You have to ban Shanji's Shyvana, right? You kind of want to ban his Rumble too. Those are the two picks that I think he's been, really successful. And then you have Cream in the mid lane. You have to ban his Sylas. You cannot let him get that. And then also the Akali is probably something you don't want to let get out of control. Then you have Abel. You want to ban that Samira. You want to ban Cold's Nautilus. Oops, that's all 5 bans, and they're probably going to pick at least a couple of those in the first rotation if you don't ban them. There's so many things here that I think OMG have really locked themselves into being we can really dominate with, that it's very difficult to actively go against this team, even if they're anti-meta, because you can't just ban a couple of the anti-meta things. They have so many options. So overall, I think Shanji, Cream, Abel, Cold, Aki, they are so flexible in how they want to play that alone will give them an advantage. Not only that, but they have the confidence from winning this series before. For FPX, I think it's on the other hand. A lot of these players have, quite frankly, underperformed for a majority of the split. I personally expected this team to be a lot better than 7 and 9. I think you can look at players like LWX and Hang as a bot lane that I was really selling as one of the best bot lanes in the world after spring, but they come into summer here, and quite frankly, they're very disappointing. At no point in the season did I ever feel like they were taking over games. Really, when FPX won, it was often off the back of Clid playing really well and winning his jungle matchup hard. And I think that could be the case here again. If Clid gets ahead, if he gets his, Lee Sin that he's super comfortable on, even if I'm not in love with the pick, it's Clid on Lee Sin. Or if he gets a Wukong or something like that, he could absolutely destroy this series, because, quite frankly, he is better than Aki. And I think that is a place where FPX could take advantage of. But I also think that there is potentially something in the mid lane to be said about that as well here. As much as I love Cream and as much as I hype him up on this channel, he is someone where when he loses relatively hard. And Kara is someone who can take advantage of weaknesses. He hasn't been the most consistent, but you give him something like an Ahri and he can go off. He can win games on that. So those are definitely two interesting matchups, but that's actually a pretty good transition into my next slide here, which is going to be the key matchup of the series. Now, the key matchup for me is going to be in the top lane here. It's going to be Shanji versus Summit. Not only was this an incredibly key matchup for the first time these two played, with Shanji really taking over that series, and that was the reason OMG was able to take the victory, but I think both of these players are incredibly integral into what their teams want to do. I've got a couple stats up here to really illustrate my point of how influential I think both of these players are towards what their team wants to do. Shanji is first in the LPL in KP percentage for top laners. That is absurd. He gets involved in just as many plays as any other top laner in the world at 68%. And that is a huge asset to OMG, because a lot of these fights they can often win because they take a man advantage. However, Summit does a very similar thing. You look at his damage percentage and his damage per minute amongst top laners, and he is only second in that. He carries a huge load for this FPX team in terms of team fight potential. So I really think that if one of these two actively is able to outplay the other in a best of 5, that team is going to win the series. If Shanji is just better than Summit and can win on the Shyvana pick or the Rumble pick, or hell, even something else, right? If he can just be more proactive, OMG has a really good shot of winning that series. However, on the flip side, if Summit can come out and be the Summit that we've seen multiple times throughout the season, and obviously we saw in North America in the spring where he just dominates laning phase and gets a huge lead, I have a hard time seeing a world in which FPX loses that series as well. So I very much think that this is the key matchup that I'm going to be looking at here for OMG versus FPX. Shanji versus Summit. It's going to be very, very fun to watch, and I think it could very much tell the difference between a win and a loss for both of these teams. Moving on to our other series here of round one, and this one is a little bit more interesting because I think it's a couple teams that a lot of people expected to be a lot better than they actually were for a majority of this year. Of course, I'm talking about the 7-10 matchup between LNG Esports and Bilbili Gaming. This is a really interesting one because these were two teams that I think a lot of people expected to be in the top 5 teams in spring, and even at the beginning of summer, I think a lot of people had expectations for both of these rosters. However, neither has at all really come to fruition. Both have shown signs and points of being really strong, but no consistency has really ever come out from either of these two teams. Now, you're looking at the score and you're seeing, okay, well, when these two played, LNG won 2-1. So LNG must have, a little bit of an advantage here, right? Well, I should note that game happened at the end of week 1. So the amount of changes that both of these teams have gone through since then. Doenby was playing phenomenal at the beginning of the split. I was like, oh my god, LNG is actually a really good team, and Doenby is really stepping up. That certainly did not stick. And then for Bilbili Gaming, they've gone through so many different roster iterations now that at this point they really feel like this is their core and this is what they want to play, and that could really solidify some more confidence for them. So yes, LNG did win 2-1 earlier this year, but it's hard for me to factor that in too much. So let's talk about both of these teams. Let's go to LNG first. LNG showed a lot of good and a lot of bad. The bad mostly came towards the middle of the season. They were good at the beginning. I think they showed some level of chemistry, maybe more so than they saw in spring, but really, this team went through some turbulence, especially in the top lane. Ole gets, benched or sits out because of the contract dispute over streaming pay. Pandasy comes in, and they just cannot win with him in. He is too big of a hindrance for them to really be able to consistently win with him in there. So Ole comes back in. All of a sudden, the team looks a lot better. They actually have a really crucial win over Weibo Gaming in this final week here to give them 7th place and to get them to 500. They probably should give them a lot of confidence. And of course, if you know how I feel about this team through the weekly recaps, you would have seen this in the All-Pro thing as well. I think Light has been severely underrated as a carry for LNG Esports all year long. He has been one of the best 1v9 players in the world so far this year, and I think that is going to continue here for LNG. He is almost certainly the most talented player in this series. Maybe with the exception of a on-form Tarzan, which we just don't have right now. Light has really been the focal point, and I really believe in him the most, I think, of almost anybody between these two teams to carry the game. His synergy with Lumao has gotten significantly better. Obviously, he played with Awandi for a considerable amount of this year, but they realized at some point that Lumao was simply just better for this team, and I completely agree. I think Lumao has been better for this team, and I think him and Light have a much better duo chemistry than him and Awandi did, than Light and Awandi did, but that's not the problem with LNG. The problem with LNG has been their mid-jungle synergy all year long. Tarzan and Doenby, you would think that putting those two together would completely unlock them, but honestly, it has made both of them a little bit worse. Doenby coming off of an MVP season, Tarzan very nearly MVP last year. Both of them come together, and they both were average at best this split. Doenby certainly had his moments, but he also had his really bad moments where he just didn't connect with the rest of the team and was having a lot of positioning mistakes. As for Tarzan, he just wasn't a game takeover kind of player. Like, he played very passive for a majority of this year, and it cost him to get behind in a lot of matchups. If these two can figure it out, if you can get the Tarzan that you got in week 10 instead of the Tarzan that you got for a majority of the split, I think LNG is a shoo-in to win this series, but that is no guaranteed feat, so definitely something to keep in mind there. As for Bilbili Gaming, wow, has this team had some ups and downs. Wow, has this team really gone from the top to the bottom, back to the top, and way down to the bottom, like way, way down to the bottom. Quite frankly, they're very lucky to be here. A lot of things had to go right for them to get the 10 seed here in the playoffs, and ThunderTalk Gaming threw it away, Anyone's Legend threw it away. Pretty much everything that needed to happen happened for them to get here, and maybe they will take advantage of it. They have some good things on this team. Bin made my all-pro team for a reason. He is genuinely one of the few top laners in the league that I truly believe can carry a game. Yes, he's going up against Ale, but Ale hasn't been the pinnacle of consistency over the course of this split. Yes, he's been better recently, but that's a matchup that I think could possibly go in Bin's favor, and if it goes heavily in Bin's favor, we could very much be seeing an opportunity for Bin to just take over the game. Even if I think that Light is the best player, there is a potential where if Bin gets really fed on a Gnar or a Jax, what's an Aphelios or what's an Ezreal gonna do about that? So definitely something to keep in mind there. The other player that I think has been really good for BLG over the course of the year has been Crisp at the support position. I don't think he's been flashy. I certainly don't think he's been the same player that he's been over the past few years, you know, talking like a top 3-ish support in the region, but I still think he's been good. Unfortunately, he's been saddled with Doggo in the bottom lane, who I think is one of the most overhyped players in the world. Obviously, I'm not going to say that he's an awful player. I definitely think that he can show up and play at an adequate level, but quite frankly, Doggo's not someone who's ever going to be able to dominate a laning phase, especially in this matchup. So if there are concerns for this team, it's mostly Doggo here. And then Weiwei, who has quite frankly just been way more disappointing than I thought he would be. Coming into the season, a lot of people had a lot of high hopes for him. I was much lower on Weiwei than I think the consensus, and I look very good about saying that right now because he really just has not been good at all this year. Him and Tarzan kind of share that. Both of them have high highs, but also low lows, and I think that jungle matchup could be a lot more interesting than we give it credit for. But looking now at the key matchup, it was a little bit tough to determine a key matchup here because I think there were a lot of different factors that could go into whether or not one of these teams wins or loses the game. But my key matchup, I settled on Doenb versus Icon in the mid lane. I really think that this matchup could actively determine whether or not BLG simply just straight up loses this series, because I have a very strong feeling that bot lane is going to heavily go in favor of LNG. And even if top lane goes in favor of BLG, if Icon gets run over here by Doenb in the mid lane, I find it very difficult to imagine a world where BLG can actively win that game. Now, you look at the stats, you're like, wow, this is very one-sided. Doenb is second in damage percentage and third in damage per gold. Icon has certainly been stepping up his game recently. Obviously, for most of the year, he split time with Fofo, but it really feels like they've settled on him in the mid lane. If he can get a good groove going and kind of take advantage of some of the weaknesses that Doenb has clearly shown throughout most of the year, I think that there could be an opportunity that Icon could pair up with Bin or may pair up with Weiwei and create a lot of pressure on the map, something he is very, very good at, something we saw he was very good at with this LNG team last year. So definitely, I think that this is my key matchup here. The winner of this matchup is likely going to determine how successful either of these teams are. If Doenb can really destroy Icon in the mid lane and get a huge lead, I don't really see a lot of avenues for BLG to come back from there. But if Icon can get a lead on Doenb and you can get some solo lane action going, I can find the macro game to be very much in the hands of BLG, and at that point, it's anybody's series. All right, that is me going over all 10 teams in some way, shape, or form, whether they be individually or in a matchup sense. And now we get to the part that I think all of you have been waiting for, my bracket prediction for the LPL Summer Playoffs. We'll be going game by game. I'll be going over, maybe not super in-depth, because we'll save some of these matchups maybe for if they happen, but you know, my overall general view on how I think this matchup would go and my predictions for who I think will be hoisting the LPL trophy come the end of the split. So let's go ahead and start right off with our 8-9 matchup, OMG taking on FPX. I already went over this in detail earlier in the video, and if I'm being quite honest with you guys, this is the most difficult series to pick, I think, from any of them all playoffs long. I think these are two of the most evenly matched teams to actually have to choose from, but I'm going to go with a little bit of an upset here, and I'm going to go ahead and pick FPX to pick up the victory. I think the talent on their team is just a little bit too high, and I worry about the rookie and inexperienced status of a lot of what OMG has going for them. I do think they're a good team, but I don't think that this year is the year for them. I think FPX should be able to take advantage of them in a best-of-5 series, so I'm picking FPX to win that series. Now we go to LNG versus BLG. And this one is also very interesting, although a little bit less controversial in my opinion. I'm pretty easily going to go with LNG in this series. I think it'll be relatively simple. I don't know if it'll be a 3-0, but I don't think it'll be all that close. LNG should just be the better team here. Not only are they getting hot at the right time, but Light is clearly the best player in the series, and Doggo might clearly be the worst player in the series, and that should be a matchup that LNG can take advantage of and capitalize on in a strong way. Even if someone like Ben wins, I have a hard time seeing him having enough of an impact on the game to be able to stop what LNG is able to do. So I have them picking up a win against BLG. But moving into the second round here, going back to the top side, we've got FPX taking on EDG. EDG kind of getting a lucky draw here, being able to face either FPX or OMG. I think they should be able to take care of business no matter who faces them. So I do have EDG beating FPX here. I don't think this would be relatively close. I think EDG is looking really solid right now. Solid enough where I think of all the teams, I think they have the best shot of actively competing with the top 4. And FPX just quite frankly isn't on that level. Unless LWX and Hang can really step up and kind of get back to the form that I think a lot of people know they're at their best at, I don't think they really have a shot of going up against EDG and staying on the same wavelength. I would think this would be closer to a 3-0 or a 3-1 in favor of EDG. Moving back down, we've got LNG taking on Weibo Gaming. And this is actually a really interesting matchup because we just saw this one in Week 10. And like in Week 10, I'm actually going to go with LNG in this one. And I know a lot of people might be upset by that, but I really see LNG as a really tough matchup overall for Weibo Gaming. I think generally speaking, Weibo is a very feast or famine team, but LNG does a very good job at managing their resources. And I think as long as Doanby isn't completely running it down to Angel, he should have more macro pressure in general. I think Doanby Tarzan is just going to be able to outskill SOFM Angel. And then all the other lanes, I feel like, even though Weibo is a little bit more talented, is mostly a push. And I would honestly take Light over Huanfeng, which I think could be the difference maker. And especially with them so convincingly destroying them in Week 10, I feel very confident about I think it could be a 3-0. I think it could be a 3-2. I think it could be a 3-0 in Weibo's direction. But at the end of the day, my prediction is going to be a 3-1 LNG. Moving back up to the top side, we've got EDG taking on RNG. Now, a lot of interesting things here in this matchup. Not only is this a historic matchup in the LPL, but the winner here secures their place into the top 4 and secures themselves at least a shot at loser's bracket. I think this series is going to be ridiculously close. I think that there is a chance that this goes, there's a chance that this goes 5 games and is ridiculously back and forth. And I have a hard time picking one over the other, but I have to. And I think just by a narrow margin, I'm going to pick RNG to pick up the win in this series. I do think it's very close. And I think matchup-wise, EDG actually matches up fairly interestingly into RNG because of how good their bot lane is. They should be able to generate leads, and that might put Gala and Ming at a position where they have to play from behind, which might not be as ideal for RNG as what they want. But at the end of the day, the talent of Xiaohu, I think, is just going to be able to take over this game, and I'm also a little bit worried about the top lane matchup. Breathe should be just better than Flandre. So for those reasons, I'm going to pick RNG. However, if you wanted to pick EDG, I would certainly not stop you. I think that series is going to be very close. Hopefully we get 5 fun games there. But moving to the bottom side now, we have Victory 5 taking on LNG Esports. And this is where the dream run for LNG ends. I think V5 is definitely more talented than them. And unfortunately, they just don't have everything pieced together. I think if you were getting a full informed Tarzan and Doanby, it might be a different story. But quite frankly, nobody on LNG can match up to the talent that Rookie and PP God are offering for V5. Even if they don't have a direct carry that they love to go into, maybe other than Photic, I still think that V5 can very much win against any of these bottom teams. I think they would have a really good shot at beating Weibo as well, in case you were wondering. But yeah, I think this is probably the dream for V5, is that they got this side of a bracket where I think all 3 of the teams that are coming before them are very beatable, in their opinion, and way easier to face than someone like an EDG would be coming out of this side. I think they're going to be very happy seeing how the bracket plays out here, and I have them pretty convincingly 3-0, 3-1, moving on to the Final 4. So yeah, the Final 4 are the top 4 teams. A little bit anticlimactic there, but I certainly think this is where things start to get interesting. You have RNG versus Top Esports. Now, Top's going to be happy to see RNG here, I think, over all the other teams. They're the only team in the top 4 that Top was actually able to beat. And so, not to say that means a lot here, but I think momentum on their side, Top Esports should be able to handle this RNG team. They are significantly more talented than them, in my opinion. And while I think Xiaohu's a good player, unfortunately, he has to go into maybe the only mid laner in the region that I have as a better player than him in Knight. I think Tian is going to absolutely smoke Wei in that matchup. And I think while we saw the bot lane have a little bit of trouble in Jackie Love and Mark going up against someone like Photic, I'm not sure Gala and Ming are the power points and the resource, heavy players that Photic is on V5. And I overall just see TES having a much easier time playing against RNG than they would any of the other top 4. So I have them moving on here. And RNG moving down to loser's bracket. And then in the other top 4 game, we've got JD Gaming taking on Victory 5. Now, a very interesting game here. I would really, really like to see this in the playoffs, and I think there's a good chance we do get to see it. And in my opinion, I pretty confidently am going to go with JDG here. I think that they are criminally underrated, and I have this team as way better than pretty much anybody has them credited for. This team could very well be the best team in the world right now, and they are absolutely playing like it. I think matchup-wise, it is a little bit interesting. Yagao into Rookie could very much be in V5's favor, but I think the difference here is I trust the jungle of JDG way more than I trust the jungle of V5. I think Kanavi versus Xiaolan Bao could be a huge disadvantage for Victory 5, and I think we're definitely going to see that in a matchup like this. So I have JDG moving on. That brings us to losers bracket, where we have RNG taking on Victory 5, a matchup I think a lot of people are going to be looking forward to, and a matchup I think could go either way. This is very much something I could see going to 5 games, being very close, being very fun to watch, but in the end, if I had to pick one of these two teams, I'm going to go with RNG to pick up the win. I just think the experience that this team has, I really like the way Xiaohu's been playing recently, and if you're giving me the bot lane matchup of Gala and Ming versus Photic and PP God, I think I'm going to have to slightly favor Gala and Ming in that one. While I think Photic and PP God have been great, I think Gala and Ming have basically done what they've done slightly better and are a little bit more talented. So for me, while I think it is very close and I think they actually match up in a very interesting manner, in a very similar manner, they're very similar teams, I think that overall RNG should have the firepower to be able to take the W in that series. But that leads us to Winners Finals. Winners Finals, of course, being Top Esports taking on JD Gaming, a matchup I think everybody, me included, really wants to see in playoffs. Now, who do I have winning this matchup? I have JD Gaming picking up the win over Top Esports and moving on to Grand Finals here. I really think that JDG has Top's number, at least for now. I think that not only are they very close, but JDG really abused them when they played early in the year, and I think matchup-wise, they actually have a really interesting matchup into Top Esports. Obviously, Knight is a very difficult player to deal with, but if anybody can deal with him, I think Yagao has the playstyle to actually play with that really well. He's going to play really passive in lane, not let Knight get a huge lead, and honestly, you could make the argument that Kanavi and Yagao are the only jungle mid duo to have equal or better synergy to Tian and Knight. I think they're the only ones that are going to be able to keep up with that, and then honestly, I think that there is a chance that top lane just gets so completely out of control here with 369 versus Wayward that the edge for me goes to JD Gaming, at least the first time they play, with momentum kind of off, TES only having one series. But that brings us to Losers Finals, and Losers Finals, obviously RNG moving up, TES moving down. Top Esports should be able to beat RNG. This really shouldn't be that close. They are the better team, and as long as they have momentum on their side, I really think that Top Esports should be able to handle RNG just like they did earlier in the bracket. If this was Victory 5, I would say a similar thing. Top Esports should be able to handle either of these teams coming out, which means that we should, in my opinion, if everything goes right, be getting a grand finals here of JD Gaming versus Top Esports. And this, in my opinion, if this gets to grand finals, I hope this goes to 5. Because truly the talent in this series is astronomical. This may be the most talented LPL finals I've ever watched if it does happen. If the bracket works out like this and both of these teams are coming in with some wins under their belt. And I think with the second go-around, I don't know if JDG can beat TES 3 times in a row. I would give the edge to TES in that series. I know I'm being a little coy here and a little sneaky. If you wanted to give TES the winners finals win and then also the grand finals win, I would understand that. But I think this might be closer to how it works out. TES could figure out JD Gaming, I think, a little bit more. They do a great job at playing teams multiple times, or at least Knight has in the past. He always gets better in repeat performances, and I think that could very well be the case here. You give this team 3 times to beat JDG, I imagine they take at least one of them, and for me, I think that would happen in grand finals. But that's it. That's my bracket prediction, and that's the playoff primer for LPL. I know this video is ludicrously long, but at the end of the day, I hope you guys got all of the playoff knowledge that you need. Not only did we go over my awards, my MVP, my Rookie of the Year, my All-Pros, we went over all 10 teams in depth, and we did a bracket analysis, so I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot. These videos are some of the the highest effort videos that we've made on this channel, so if you do enjoy them, it really would mean a lot. Let me know down in the comment section below what your playoff predictions are. Who do you want to see in the finals? What team do you think I'm sleeping on? What team do you think I'm overrating maybe in some of these previews? I would love to know all that down in the comment section below. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.